And here we are now with Miss Shamila Kasim. Miss Shamila, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Thanks,
Good.
Uki.
She's from South Africa, so I'm going to tell you a bit about Miss Shamila. So she has been going around the world improving civil society when advocating for the budget for 25 years now. That's a very long time. That's a very good career of you, Shamila. 25 years. Now, her work experience centers around public budgeting for social justice and equity to support activists' knowledge and skills to produce evidence-based research for their campaigns. But did you also know that she was also instrumental in shaping the United Nations General Comment number 19? Now, that's a very significant achievement. That's public budgeting for realizing children's rights, in addition to shaping the child support grant in South Africa. So, Shamila, how are you today? And thank you very much for joining our 51st episode of the Cerita Live Talk Show program.
Thanks, Uki. It's nice to connect with you again after all this time. Thank you.
Yes, it has been a long time. I've met Shamila on some years ago. I think it was 2013, so it was quite some time ago. So it's very good to see. So your profile said, one that you sent to me, that you love swimming and Pilates. Are you still able to do it during COVID in South Africa? What city are you in right now?
I'm in Cape Town, and of course we have the ocean now. We've had a few lockdowns, and one of the stages that we had, or levels that we had, disallowed people on the beach, and so we couldn't go to the beach. So I couldn't swim in the water here either because we were not allowed. And so then our pools were closed as well. So I haven't been swimming in spite of the fact that the beaches are open, but the water here is very cold. So when I do swim in the swimming pool, it has to be 25 degrees Celsius plus because it's very cold.
Okay,
and
so
I haven't been doing swimming. I haven't been doing Pilates. But in its place, I have been eating lots of chocolate cake, which I think is a good substitute.
Everyone is always eating the delicious food they have right now since they are in lockdown. Well, okay, audience, if you have questions for Miss Shamila, you can type them out in our chat box, and I'll read them to you, Miss Shamila, and she will answer at the end of this program. Nah, untuk para pemirsa, tema kali ini adalah tentang advokasi kelompok perempuan dan anak dalam penganggaran negara. Untuk kalian yang mau bertanya-tanya, boleh tulis pertanyaannya di kolom chat box pakai bahasa Indonesia. Nanti saya terjemahkan dan tanyakan di akhir program ini. Now, my first question to Ms. Shamila, could you tell us how you started to be interested on the issue of fiscal policy?
So I always want to reflect on that question because it reminds me of how important it is to have laws and policies for human rights that can be affected through the budget. And the way I started this work was that I come from a children's rights background. I worked in a sector on child abuse prevention many years ago. That was around the time that our constitution in South Africa was being discussed. And I was part of a working group. And doing this work, particularly on children's rights, made me realize that we can have an amazing constitution with equally amazing policies and laws. It would be relatively meaningless if we didn't have the money, public funds, to make those policies and laws real. And so that led me, I took time out to do a master's for 2 years. And I focused on understanding better the relationship between economics, not pure economics, and policies and laws, and particularly human rights policies and laws. And that's how I started my work. And I immediately started working after that on the children's budget. And it was really a significant time for me.
Was it really a natural progression for you from fiscal policy? how was it? Was it the fiscal policy first, and then the children's and human rights and gender second, or is it intertwined together?
So when I started this work about 22, 23 years ago, the disciplines were quite separate. And what that means is that there were organizations or individuals who were interested in working on either human rights or issues on education or health. And then there were people who worked at think tanks, who wanted to look at fiscal policy. And at that time, there were a lot of interest in changing fiscal policy and examining fiscal policy from a human rights perspective, but mainly from a poverty alleviation perspective. And so the groups were separate, and so it was quite hard to get these groups together, because in one group there were pure economists, and then in the other group there were activists and human rights sort of people who work on policy design and similar. So I worked with an incredible group of people right at the beginning who understood how those groups could all work together. And today we see so many organizations working together who understand very clearly that we need to bring all of these issues together if we are going to achieve social justice, racial and gender justice in the different work that we do.
Okay, so what was the challenge that you have faced at the time when, this is in South Africa, you started in South Africa, right?
Yes, I started in South Africa, and almost immediately, because of my area of interest, that is human rights, almost immediately started working globally with a small group of colleagues who wanted to know how to bring human rights and budgets together. So what were the challenges? And the challenges are still remaining today. It's mainly government. And one is access to information, access to budget information. So making sure that government makes that information public, but also to make that information understandable to the broader public, and that it's not just available for people who are economists. And I saw my role, as well as just working with a number of colleagues who felt similar, to make sure that the budget is accessible, not only publicly, but that people generally can understand when government makes that budget public. And so there was the challenge in government, and that still exists. And then general skepticism from government. Can these people do it? It's only technocrats who should be doing this work. And so to slowly break down that skepticism and see how to connect with allies in government who can in fact break down those barriers so that we can form partnerships and have allies in government who can help us. But those are still the challenges that we have today. That is access to information, making information understandable when it is publicly available. And then, of course, participation. Government is still not keen, generally speaking, not opening spaces at the right time during the budget process for the general public to participate in shaping what the budgets look like nationally, as well as at service delivery level at local government. But just going back to your question around the challenges, I've spoken about the government, the challenges that we've had with government. I haven't seen significant challenges in civil society. Yes, we've seen challenges where comrades have been locked up, their lives have been threatened. But generally speaking, when organizations, individuals in organizations and movements see how this work has had an impact, this work meaning bringing budgets into their advocacy work, there is a phenomenal commitment to making sure that they understand this work and understand how the public budget can push forward their particular social justice issue.
So many organizations, including civil society organizations, you all mentioned about the lack of gender perspective in the government, but civil society are also usually do not begin in having gender perspective as well. Are there any challenges when you're trying to incorporate the gender perspective on, or do you use the gender perspective, or you also use feminism, a feminism theory in training those civil society as well?
I would say yes, I do use, but I suppose if we have a closer discussion, my understanding of a gender perspective might be different to yours, or feminist theory might be a different understanding to yours. So yes, I do, in a sense that I look at, drawing from critical race theory, I look at gender intersectionalities. What that means is I look at the different social issues, economic and political issues that affect women, and how that impacts their ability and their capabilities to engage with everyday issues, as well as to be able to achieve, for policies to achieve the equity that we desire in our social justice work. And so not only to be able to look at the issues of class, race, position in society, factors that the further the oppression or the deeper the oppression, the more those different layers of oppression isolate women from engaging with everyday life in society, or benefiting from policies and laws that should be benefiting everybody. So when I think about feminist theory or a gender perspective, I already start in how I work with women in designing a program that could help them think about what are the budget issues that they need to concentrate on, the issues for their gender advocacy. And so it really starts for me, not only thinking about how the policies can change, but what are the opportunities for women to participate in a way that women also feel confident, and I am steering away from the word empowered, that women feel confident to participate and make opinions publicly about the budget that affects their lives. So for me, when we speak about gender responsive budgeting, we need to start at a point where women themselves are self-advocates. And for me, I'm merely a facilitator in that process. And when working with women's group, that process should really be led completely, designed and shaped by the women that are working, who are the self-advocates and who are working to changing certain policies.
Okay, so you have been training civil society on these issues around the world. Did you train also government as well, government officials on gender perspective, on having gender perspective in budgeting as well?
So, okay, that's a very sore question for me, and I'll tell you why it's a sore question, because I would like to think I'm a very patient person, but when I have government and civil society in my room, in a room of training or whatever, you sort of just fostering knowledge and skills, it's really hard for me. And so, because I lack that patience, I prefer to, I prefer not to do it. So in the situations where I have and I don't, in my experience, I will never facilitate a session where government people in the same room, because in my experience, government becomes extremely defensive and crowds out the concerns that are being raised by civil society. So I have done a few, but probably for the last very many number of years, I haven't. For the reason that I feel civil society gets crowded out, and we need a space where we can work together without the voice of government overpowering the work that we do.
So, in your opinion, do you think that the qualities of budget policies compared to in the past and with now, you have been working with other people as well, with international NGOs and also NGOs in other countries as well on budget training on budget policies, on fiscal policy, and how to engage with the government and as well. Has there been any progress, or is it actually getting worse these days? This is probably, this question will be more relevant if we're not accounting for COVID, because that will be a whole different story.
Sure, I agree. So I would like to think that the quality of budgets has improved. For one reason that I feel confident about making that is if we review the Open Budget Index, which is a survey of 100 countries that examines the openness of budget documents for national governments globally, we see that the quality has changed and the openness of the budget process has changed as well. However, what we do see is there's still a big lack of participation. That is government's interest to create policies and to create opportunities where civil society can shape the budget at whatever level, no, not whatever level, at national level, in terms of consulting, but also creating participatory processes where civil society can provide their opinion on what the budget should look like. That is one aspect that is still very lacking. A second part, in my opinion, is just the rigor of scrutiny of budgets, and that is done by the Supreme Audit institutions and Parliament. And I think these audit institutions and parliaments are still very weak in interrogating, as an oversight body, the spending and allocations of budgets. I think those two are two big issues. But coming back to how these policies have changed over the years, because I am of the opinion that government budgets are highly political. And so we see that the quality of budgets, as well as making budget information open, largely depends on which government is in power at that time. So we've seen that change at national level, but then coming back to local government as well, we've also seen how that open budgets have changed, those open budgets have changed depending on who's in government. And then just moving on to local government and the quality, it's hard to provide a confident answer regarding the quality of budgets at local government level. But just from working with a few colleagues internationally, colleagues who work at local government level, the quality of budgets seem to not be improving. So it's the quality, but also openness. That there's always the drive or the advocacy to demand that budgets are more open, and that these budgets that are available or publicly available at local government level, that people are able to understand it. So it differs really, the quality really differs from sort of the level of government And I think it also, there's the electoral issue also plays a big part. And so while, yes, we could say at national level there have been changes, there are some questions about where these changes have been made, the consistency of these changes, and also just issues on who influences that quality, so the participation question and the oversight question.
So, do you think that quality that you mentioned about how you said that the participation is still lacking, and also the investigation on the detailed scrutiny of the budget itself by the auditors are also quite lacking as well? And you also mentioned about local government is not really improving. Is it the same for all countries that you have engaged, trained, or are there specific regions that are actually doing better, and which one that's actually getting worse? Do you have any examples?
So it's hard for me to give an example, more than one example, but one project that I am involved in is in South Africa, and it is a campaign called Asivikelane. And it is a campaign that works towards improving service delivery at local government level. And so this campaign started last year, just before COVID, and it puts in place a number of community members that examines certain points of service delivery or certain outputs. Service delivery outputs. So in this instance, they look at water and sanitation, and they examine in relation to examining the challenges on water and regarding water and sanitation. So, for example, that there isn't maintenance of communal toilets, for example, in some of these municipalities, that there isn't there's maintenance, and there isn't the installation of the number of toilets, for example, that are needed in these municipalities. So they would then look at the policies or agreements that government has with service delivery businesses, that government has in fact appointed, and they would then look at what government has in fact delivered. They also look at the budgets. What we have seen is that, and I would encourage our colleagues here to look it up. It's a campaign called Asivikelane. It's ASIVIKELANE, and it has this traffic light grading, and it works very fast in terms of members in the community grading government service delivery. So they examine what government has delivered over a certain period, and also what budgets has gone into that service delivery over that period. And they make an assessment of how government is progressing. So coming back to your question, I can say in this instance, government has been, at local government, we find that government has been very responsive. To the extent that when government see that, or officials see at local government level that they haven't got a green light, they would phone those members in the community to want to engage with them and ask, how can we turn our grading green for our municipality? So there is that engagement, and it's a fantastic campaign because people have been able to organize in spite of restrictions around social distancing and crowds getting together. And there is the interest from government, certainly. And so the next move would certainly want to see how to get more people to be able to understand the budget and to be able to influence the budget and service delivery at local government level. But it's hard for me to say about or talk credibly about other countries.
Okay, so In that project, especially in South Africa, how do women engage with the government? And this is, I'll ask about it later, but let's ask about women first. We'll ask, you also said about engaging children as well, but how about women first? What are they doing when engaging the government?
The community monitors are women. Yes. And in my understanding, government officials, it's a mix between men and women. But there is a big interest, and it's mainly led by women in terms of the community monitors. And not only a great interest, but there's a great understanding in terms of the role that women can play in shaping service delivery and ensuring that there is sufficient service delivery to those municipalities, and that government delivers on its promise to these municipalities as well. So women are an integral part to ensuring that participation happens, and that that participation means real change for service delivery.
Was it a conscious decision to include women as leading in monitoring the supervising the project?
I'm not sure, Uki, because I wasn't there at the beginning of the project. Okay. But I do know now there is an awareness that we need to make sure that there are significant numbers of women who can participate, and equally that women feel confident in participating and able to participate in terms of just their own resources available.
So why do you think that it is important for them to be involved in this whole public delivery thing? This mindset is quite changing, right? Because in the past, women are usually not involved, and I do not know whether they actually even care to try to be involved or not, especially in South Africa. I know from a survey in Indonesia, they were actually interested in being involved in the process, but they do not know how, or sometimes they do not have any access to it. How about in South Africa? How important it is for them to engage?
So I think, just picking up on your first question on how, I do believe that once people within civil society or organizations in civil society understand how they can participate, as well as what the impact of their participation could be, that level of interest and commitment grows. Because if you talk to most people about the budgets, they think, oh, numbers, they think they have to be on a computer and work on Excel sheets. Most of this work does not involve that. And when they see that there are different ways in monitoring the budget that can be effective and impactful, the level of interest is definitely different to being able to participate and just go to meetings. They want to be involved once they also see that their participation calls on their own experiences of being a member in that society, and that their own experiences are crucial in what our policies look like, and it's crucial in improving our policies. And so I think that once women understand the value that they already have, and how to use that value to benefit their municipalities or their neighborhood, they generally commit to wanting to be part of that movement or that organization to improve the neighborhoods that they are in. Then I think that, generally speaking, it's important that women are involved. So, of course, for those exact issues that I've just mentioned, but also that there is for decades and still now, in this work, we've seen that women are not included, either because they don't have the time, because of their various responsibilities, or they are overlooked, as in many instances in society they are overlooked. And so when we do in fact reach women or women's groups, or let's say women in broader social justice groups, and they understand the role that they can play, there is, we see a significant impact in terms of the numbers that come together, women numbers that come together and want to be part of this change for their neighborhoods or communities. And I think just generally, once people know that this work doesn't entail only going through textbooks and loads of budget books and having to read tons of policy papers, once they see the meaning or understand the meaning that they have, it becomes something that they relate to. And it's something that they want to be a part of. And so I think that is the kind of motivation that steers women to want to be part of that change. And that motivation also brings in other women when, through the work that they do, other women see how their friends or their family member or their church member has been able to change things in the community. So there is still the need to make an effort, or not even an effort, to make sure that women are involved, because still women are excluded from these processes.
Okay, so your work also involved working is it with children or actually related to children on fiscal policy? How about children involvement in the budget policy? How can it be done? This is actually something quite new even in Indonesia as well.
Yeah, so similarly you could ask the question about, I think some people could ask, how is that women can be involved? So I believe if you are going to change any policy, you need to include those people that are going to be affected by that policy. Those people who are currently affected and those people who will be affected by the change in that policy. And so therefore, with my children's rights background, I am very, very supportive of children's participation in the budget process. I was involved with our current Children's Rights Commissioner in the province that I'm in South Africa, where we started a program, and she's still using it in the province, where children are in fact able to make comment on the budget. They are able to provide their experiences and to be able to give opinion on what should go into the budget. Now, we can all express what it is we want to see in the budget, but we all have demands, and the fiscal envelope is only so big or so small. So if there are participation processes in place, all of those ideas and opinions and experiences will be taken into account. And I think in those participation processes, it's important that children are involved, because children have experiences, they have skills, they have experiences of what it means to not have money, what that money means. So I'm not talking about a 4-year-old. We need to be realistic about which child should be involved or should be part of the participatory processes. We should be realistic about that. On the other hand, those participatory processes should be inclusive in a way that everybody feels that they can participate. So you adjust your methodologies in a way that everybody feels that they can contribute. And so there are a lot of processes that happen behind the scenes. So for example, with this program that is being currently run by the Children's Rights Commissioner here, what we did was to make sure that we had extensive training programs with children between the ages of 14 and 18, and we also included children with disabilities. And what that program's intention was, or it aimed at making sure that those children would be able to participate in, let's say, the mayoral's budget speech. They would be able to participate in their local councils or engage with their local councillor and provide their opinion on the budget. And that process that we had with the children, there were about 20 children. There was one councillor that got involved and was really keen on connecting with the children in that group, and he was in fact astounded at the knowledge that the children had gained over a period of time, and how we got to a place where that group of children felt confident about expressing their opinion about the budget was to make sure that they constantly reflected on their own experiences and to be able to relate their own experiences individually, but also as a group, and how it affects other children, their experiences. Are they similar to other children? What is it that other children would need to be able to live a fulfilled life? They were able to understand that and speak about it from experience. And what greater value is there in shaping policy, that's my opinion, in being able to talk from a place of experience and being able to understand the experience of people similar to me. And so although it takes it takes a lot of iterations working with children, not only because of the time that they have and because of the access to information at local government, but as well as the reluctance generally of adults to listen to children. So simultaneously there needs to be a relationship that's being developed with the government officials so that they are receptive to children when they are participating in a process that could influence the budget.
So I just want to make this clear. What age group of these children that you're talking about? Because when we think of children, probably you mentioned, well, it's not the 4 years old. So what is the most realistic age group that's being involved here?
My experience has been working with children between the ages of 14 and 18, and then also working with children with different levels of disability, different types of disability. And what is key when working with children is to be able to have a support group that children are a part of. So when myself and my colleague worked with these children, we made sure that they came from organizations that already have some connection with these children, and the children have a connection with these children. So most of them came from either youth groups or children's rights groups, or they came from their church, so that they were nominated by groups, and those groups saw that they would be able to, that the children would be able to benefit from this participation, particularly around the budget, but it could also benefit the advocacy objectives of the organization that they are coming from. So some groups were working on, let's say they came from a children's rights group, some of them were working on social security, for example. So for those groups to be able to understand how the budget can help them achieve their social security advocacy goals. And so we thought it was important that we do not draw children from, Uki's cousin, maybe, Uki, do you want to ask your cousin if they can come into this group, or X's child. So we wanted to have children that came out of a group so that they are able to take that information into their group, and that group can also benefit from the training that they were having.
So when you're preparing the groups, about groups that is not usually conventional when in participating in public fiscal policy discussion, like women and children, when preparing them for, what are the methods that you usually use, that use most effective for them? Okay, sorry, there was a little bit of technical issues there. So my question was that when preparing for groups, women groups and children groups, and engaging with the government, you train them as well on how to prepare them. So what is the most effective method for them to be able to absorb the skills and knowledge that they need to be able to engage with the government, and also able to talk about to be contributing to the fiscal policy? What is the method?
So for me, the most effective way of engaging any audience, be it children or any other different group of people, is for that group of people to know that their experiences have value, and their experiences will influence what they learn and how they learn. So to always acknowledge that they have education, they have knowledge, they have experience, and to pull that education, knowledge, skills, experience into that learning program. So to constantly speak about their experiences and then bring it out into a general discussion, and then bring it back to their own experiences. So if we are talking about, let's say with the Asivikalani campaign, if we are wanting to improve service delivery and access to toilets in some of our informal settlements in South Africa, I am not the best person to talk about it. I have information that could help people who want to change their neighborhoods, that could perhaps make them understand what are the different resources that could enhance their own knowledge and experiences. But essentially, they are key to making those changes. So be it with children, be it with women, be it with children with disabilities, their experiences and their knowledge is key to shaping what they learn and how they learn.
So do you find it different, your method is different when training on children? Women tends to be quite similar with adults as well. How about children with groups of, and you said groups with disabilities as well? How is it the difference that you approach them?
So my approach is similar. And in addition to making sure that the participants' experience is central to the learning, I also draw on bringing in, not bringing in, but making sure that from the group being trained, there is a core group of, let's say, advisors, for lack of a better word, who guides the learning process, what needs to change, how it needs to change, and they are then able to have conversations, dialogue, engagements with the rest of the participants, and And through that engagement, they bring it back to us. Because sometimes there are people who don't feel comfortable engaging directly with, let's say, a facilitator. But I think that dialogue, those two processes, one between a core group from the training group to engage with the rest of the training group to improve or change the training, and then also that core group working with the facilitator to make sure that the goals of, or the vision that the participants have about making the change they want to see can be sort of carried out, not sort of carried out, but their learning contributes to them being able to feel confident and to have other resources that can help them achieve their advocacy goal.
Okay, so
I see my role very strongly as a facilitator, and that participants drive the process. My role is really to facilitate and draw out at key points information or ways of doing things that speaks directly to how participants want to learn and what they want to learn.
how about the result? Are the governments are actually appreciating the involvement, women and children's involvement in the budgeting process? And is it still happening until now?
I don't understand the second part of the question.
Oh, sorry. I mean, this is you mentioned about you have already have experience in training women and children to be involved in engaging with government in fiscal budget policy. Does the government now proactively involve them because of this, or are they still waiting for NGOs or international NGOs to forcefully make the two groups together? Or yeah, as I said, are the governments now doing it proactively now?
So it's really hard for me to comment on a global level, but from
how about in South Africa?
So let me think about the Asavikalani, and I do think that there is a very high response from government to be proactive in wanting to hear the opinions and experiences and the evidence from people in those communities and in those municipalities. So yes, there are instances where government is being proactive. I think, so in my experience, I've seen sort of varying degrees of government being proactive, where in one instance they'll welcome government's participation once they see that these groups are able to, or few groups are able to engage meaningfully in some parts of the budget. But then at some point, that same government with that same group will see that they're either doing, well, I'm not sure, but in some instances, there is that pushback. And that pushback could be for a number of reasons. It could be that government wants to now close its processes, be it because it's a new government, or that there's a truth that's being uncovered, or demands that are being made that government can't meet. So it really depends from government to government. It's really hard to make a general or provide or get a general impression of what this looks like. Yeah, I've also seen governments, for example, what was it, the Arab Spring, the so-called Arab Spring, that I worked in some Middle Eastern countries, where there was a big openness about participation. And I can give you an example for Egypt and Tunisia. But then as soon as they saw what civil society is capable of, those doors started closing for different reasons as well. So organizations have found governments being proactive and then shutting the door for various reasons, as I said, but it could also be capacity. A different person coming into that same role, they don't have the capacity to release the documents, as I saw in Egypt. They committed to releasing a number of budget documents, but they didn't have the resources. So there are different reasons that that I have seen why those changes have not taken place or have taken place.
How about in Southeast Asia? What do you think are about what's happening in Southeast Asia on those involvement businesses, civil society, and also with the government? When you're training civil society in Southeast Asia, especially in ASEAN countries, you did that before in 2013. So, what did the participants express to you? What the challenges that they faced when engaging with the government?
So I was very energized, Uki, when we had that training. I was energized because the people who were part of that training were very committed to wanting to make changes either on overall budget policy or on certain sectors like education in the budget or health in the budget. And it was also, it was amazing to see just the progress that these groups have made. So if I recall correctly, it was Indonesia, Vietnam, Myanmar, Philippines, and there was one more. I'm forgetting one more.
Vietnam, Myanmar, Cambodia as well.
Cambodia.
Yeah.
And
Singapore.
And Singapore, correct. Yes, how can I forget Singapore? So what was significant, and it's always, in my experience, important to remember this, is that there are gains in these countries that we are working in, and that we shouldn't lose sight of. Gains in terms of the changes that have been able to, that organizations have been able to achieve. And so, for example, with Vietnam, the group that we were working with there were able to report on the significant gains in terms of making budgets open at the national level, and that government in certain local governments had committed to some of the groups in that room to want to make changes. And so one really needs to hear about these stories to be able to understand what's happening in the countries. It's really hard to say this is what's happening globally or this is what's not happening globally, because there's just so much budget work that's happening in more than, I don't know how many, 150 countries. And so there was also the instance of Philippines, and Philippines has been doing this work for so many years and really pioneering innovative work on changing budgets. Indonesia as well, particularly at local, there have been many changes, as well as citizens understanding, and I use the word citizens very broadly, not carrying an ID or a passport, but very broadly, understanding their significance and that they can make changes to the budget, or pushing government for citizens to be part of that changes in the budget. Then also Singapore, I think my recollection, and of course those are many years ago, and things could have changed. There was a commitment, or an interest at least, from our participants there to examine certain budgets, and that, from what I know, that the budgets were not made public. Not all the budgets were made public, the budget documents, and there was a concern about which budgets they needed information on. So one was around, so Vietnam, very broadly, we saw some cooperation from national government and local government. Indonesia, you would know better than I do, but what I see is that there's a very strong interest from local governments or citizens at service delivery level to push this issue of opening budgets and making budgets work for service delivery. Singapore, we're wanting to see more open budgets and more cooperation from government. Cambodia has always been, I see Edwina's just commenting on that. Thanks, Edwina. So Cambodia has always been fluctuating in terms of their commitment with the budget. And that is really very closely tied to, and so there have been significant strong budgets open, but then depending on who's in power, they've also lost those gains in Cambodia. We said Philippines.
Shamila, the connection broke off when you said what is happening. So in Cambodia, so what you said that the Cambodia situation is changing. What ties?
Their results always fluctuate in terms of how open their budgets are, how
Why is it?
flexible government is, and that is very dependent on who the government in power is. Although we've seen with the groups that we've worked with a big commitment in pushing for those governments to make the budget open, publicly available that is, and understandable. It's a society where there could be severe consequences when civil society pushes too hard. So that was Cambodia, Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines I spoke about, yes. So I think in different ways, budget work has been happening there. And just an amazing, the other country that we forgot was Myanmar.
Myanmar, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what's happening there. So, I mean, we know what is happening there, but there was budget work happening as well, but it also seems that it's a very precarious environment to work in and do this kind of work. Budget work can be dangerous. Many of our colleagues have experienced that.
Yeah, last month we have someone from Myanmar talking about what is happening politically in Myanmar, but we haven't touched on budget fiscal policy. So maybe you could see, maybe also the audience can see what is happening with in Myanmar with our previous program with Ms. Wai Min. She was an activist for Myanmar as well. So that's already 1 hour, Shamila. That was a very good one. Yes, that was very informative. It's very interesting to know that apparently you can also involve children as well in budget fiscal policy. That's something new which I'm sure the audience will also appreciate as well. How are you still working with children as well, like with groups of children right now as well, even until now? I think I see your profile said it's quite some time ago.
So I'm in an advisory capacity at the moment to the Children's Rights Commissioner here, and so particularly working on children participating in governance, monitoring government's performance, using the budget as well to provide insight into how government is performing on children's rights in this province only, the Western Cape province in South Africa.
Is it still, are they still doing it even during COVID, during the emergency in COVID?
The commissioner, in fact, she has every Friday, she has about a 3-hour training session. She started out last year on WhatsApp. Training on WhatsApp. And so that has moved over to a different forum where children can, which is similar to one of the Zooms, but it's an education platform. But yes, she was determined to start working with the children as soon as she was appointed in that position last year, June.
Okay, so, well, it has been 1 hour. It has been lovely to speak with you again, Shamila. I hope that we can still be in contact. And, okay, there was one last question. Do you have any memorable moments? Because we're talking, the program is about telling a story. So it wouldn't be a good way to end this program without you telling what is your most memorable thing that you can during your career.
My most memorable, well, I'm not sure if it's my most memorable, but it's certainly memorable. So when I was working with many colleagues on ensuring that the poorest children in South Africa had access to the Social Security grant, which is the child support grant. When we started the campaign, children under the ages of 11 only had access. And the campaign was pushing for all children under 18, obviously means tested, all poor children, should have access, and that every year there should be an inflation-related increase to that Social Security grant. And this is memorable because the person that I worked with passed away at the end of last year. It's also memorable because he was a key ally in our national treasury to push for these changes that this campaign wanted to see. And the organization that I worked with at that time was literally shared a backyard with Parliament, the Parliament of South Africa. And, well, maybe not literally shared. There was the revenue service that, yeah, kind of blocked that. But it took me 2 minutes to get into Parliament when I left our door, our front door of the organization. And he would often have to appear before the committee that was examining the child support grant and whether government can increase access as well as maintain, or just generally how to improve the child support grant. So I had established a very good working relationship with him, and it's memorable in that it's very rare that you have an official who feels confident in the work that civil society does. And almost for all of the meetings, he'd come, his meeting would be at 9:30 and he'd come to the reception at 8:50. And my colleague at the reception would say, Shamila, your friend is downstairs. And he'd come upstairs, we had 4 flights of stairs, and either the lift was broken or what, but he would take the trouble of going up 4 flights of stairs. And for those few minutes before his committee meeting, he'd ask me for sort of the key points that he needs to take into his meeting from the research that civil society has done. To show, one, that this child support grant, if they do extend it to 18, is affordable and sustainable, and providing reasons why all poor children under the age of 18 should have this child support grant. And so it's memorable because of the relationship that was struck between a National Treasury official, which is, in those days it was very rare, and also that he really appreciated the work that civil society did. And although it took many years, and there's still issues around the child support grant, over 2 years we were able to achieve, one, that it's no longer inflated related, but one, we were able to achieve the inflation related increase. All children were slowly under the age of 18, slowly being put on the child support grant records. And that the means test was adjusted because we felt that the test excluded a significant number of poor children. So that is memorable because of the relationship that civil society was able to strike up as well with Treasury, as well as just the acknowledgement by National Treasury that civil society can produce and does produce credible information.
Okay, that's quite rare actually to have someone like that that's very supportive and also and have a very strong commitment and continuing commitment as well. That's a very good one. Okay, thank you very much, Shamila, for your time with us at Bercerita.
Everybody for listening.
Well, it's okay if people are late and tuning in out to our show, because they don't have to worry, because this live interview is also being recorded and will be posted to our beritabaru.co YouTube channel and in our Berita Baru podcast in audio form. I'll inform you when we have posted this program as well. So, Shamila, thank you very much. And for the audience, it has been a good 1 hour. I'll see you again next time for another edition, an international edition of Bercerita. So, bye everyone. Bye,
Thank you.
Shamila. So I'll see you again.